I want to talk about regime change and Iran. When we think about regime change, especially these days, we usually think about our policy failures in Iraq or Afghanistan. And it's not obviously a model that we want to pursue. But there's one of the most important regime changes that ever occurred for U.S. policy is the one we don't think about a lot, or we've forgotten. And that's regime change in Russia back in the 1980s under President Reagan primarily, and to a lesser extent President Bush. How did we do it? How did we manage to get regime change in the former Soviet Union? And there were a number of things that we did. One was we did everything we could with our allies to lower the prices of oil and gold, because the Soviet Union needed a lot of cash because they needed to import food because their agricultural sector was so backwards, and also because they needed to buy high-tech things to keep their military and economic system working, and they needed cash for that. So what Reagan did, and this wasn't done accidentally, they knew what they were doing, is they did everything to increase oil supply, and we did that working with the British and the Norwegians and the North Sea oil. And of course, we did it with the Saudis who were pumping oil. And oil prices dropped, and that hurt the Soviet Union. One of the other things we did was to work with South Africa. This is at the time of apartheid, but South Africa produced a lot of the world's gold. And we got them as probably one of the reasons why Reagan didn't pursue anti-apartheid policies as much as he could have or should have. But what they did was they got the South Africans to produce more gold, which dropped the price, which also hurt the Soviet Union, which was a major gold exporter. Internally, we worked with Pope John Paul II, especially having to do with things regarding Poland and the unrest that was beginning there. And also even the American unions cooperated with Reagan and worked with the Polish labor unions, which helped undermine the government in Poland and created more problems for the Russians in Eastern Europe. There was also military pressure around the world, and we did that through several things. One was we launched a pretty large military buildup under Reagan, spanning the Navy, the Army, the Air Force, the Marine Corps. We had the 600-ship Navy and aggressive policies like the maritime strategy debate going on. And all that put additional pressure on the Russians and caused them to want to buy more weapons. Now, the Soviets had always bought cheap industrial type weapons that could be mass produced. But by the 80s, they were building high-tech stuff. The latest models of their jets and their tanks needed a lot of high technology, much of which was imported from the West, and that cost money, and they didn't have the money to do that. So as they did it, that meant they didn't have money to spend elsewhere, and it's one of the reasons they were under increasing pressure at home. The other thing we did around the world was to resist them in some places, whether it worked locally or not didn't matter, but by stepping up resistance in places like Central America, Afghanistan, Angola, all around the world, and along with this military buildup, it increased the pressure on the Soviet Union so that they had to spend more money and buy more arms and help out their allies with even more assistance, all of which strained their economics. And ultimately, the Soviet Union imploded. And we know what happened. Now, if you look at the situation in Iran, and again, we sort of portray Trump much like Reagan as some sort of idiot who doesn't know what he's doing. But if you look carefully at what's going on around Iran, you can see almost the same pattern. It's almost as if they're using the anti-USSR regime change strategy against Iran. Number one, you have sanctions, which were reimposed after we dropped out of the Iran trade deal. And the sanctions are hurting the Iranians, whether they want to admit it or not. I mean, there are estimates that it's cost them anywhere from 30 to 40% of their entire budget that they don't have. And if you look at what's happening in Iran, because they don't have as much money, and because all the money that they fortunately got under President Obama because of his his policy and his effort to get that treaty passed. That's gone. So they have all these expenditures around the world and they have less money. So what they're doing is basically trying to maintain their expenditures regionally, which I'll talk about in a little bit. But at home, they're raising taxes and they're also cutting subsidies, which means if you're an Iranian, the price of things are going up and the amount of money your take-home pay is going down. So you're getting squeezed. And inflation estimates vary, but it's big in Iran. I've seen things, it's 40% up to 100% or 1,000%. It depends on who you're looking at and what time there is. So all this is increasing the pressure on Iran. You see oil prices going down. The United States is the world's largest oil producer and exporter right now. And you just saw recently where they were working with, I'm sure we're working with the Saudis to, increase oil production, which brings down the price, which hurts, of course, Russia as well, but also hurts the Iranians because they've lost all kinds of money from the inability to export oil. Now, a lot of it they can't get out because of sanctions, but even the stuff that they do get out is worthless. So they're losing money on that level. You also see a pattern of resistance, much like you saw Reagan pursue against the Soviet Union. You can see the places where the Iranians are heavily involved. You see they have problems. Lebanon, there's unrest and problems there. It's been going on for the last several months. Syria, the Syrian civil war has been going on now for just short of a decade. And you have to remember, Syria under Assad has no economy. I mean, they have nothing. They don't have any money. Syria runs on Iranian money. The Iranians have been bankrolling Syria since even before the civil war began, probably well before, maybe somewhere about 2007 they started increasingly bankrolling Syria. That costs a lot of money. So basically, the Iranian budget just doesn't have to support Iran; it also has to support Syria, which is fighting a war. All that costs money. One of the ways that they've kept Assad in power is to move Hezbollah forces from Lebanon into Syria. But those people have to be paid. They have to be supported. And the Iranians are paying for all that. If you look at Iraq, there's unrest in Iraq internally. The Iranians dominate the Iraqi government. And there are a lot of people in Iraq who don't like that. I mean, the Shia in Iraq dominate politically, but you still have about at least a third of the country are Sunnis, and they don't like the Shia dominating. And there's been a lot of unrest. There've been protests. There's been riots. There's been attacks on the Iranian consulate and embassy. All of that causes additional problems for Iran. Yemen. If you look at what's going on in Yemen, you have this war that's been going on and on and on. And the Saudis are increasing support for the anti-Houthi forces in Yemen. And the Houthis, of course, are supported by the Iranians. So the more effort the Saudis make in Yemen, and we make an effort there too with drone strikes and things like that, that's even more money that the Iranians have to fork over to keep the Houthis going so that doesn't collapse. So if you look at all this, the Iranians have to they're spending all this money in Yemen, they're spending money in Lebanon, they're spending money in Syria, they're spending money in Iraq. And this is all kinds of pressure. And then, of course, they have problems at home. I mean, there's been unrest in Iran because of the coronavirus outbreak. But even before that, there was unrest in the fall, before the election, because people were protesting and all. And then, who knows what percentage of Iranian people support the regime or not? I don't know. There are people who tell you not many do, or less than half do. I don't know. But whatever it is, there are obviously people in Iran who do not like the regime. And of course, that number is probably increasing as subsidies go down and taxes go up. And people and unemployment's going up. You have a very high unemployment rate among especially the young college-educated people. They get out of college and there's no jobs. So all this is creating internal pressure in Iran. So the mullahs have all these things going on. And on top of that, under Trump compared to Obama, the U.S. is much more confrontational. We've been, striking back at them. We've been hitting some of their proxies in Iraq. Somebody, us, the Israelis, who knows, occasionally hit their proxies in Syria, and of course we got the Saudis hitting their proxies in Yemen, and all this causes additional problem for them. And on top of that, since the fall, when they attacked some of the tankers and everything, we've been building up our military there very quietly, and you don't hear a lot about it, but there's more carriers there than usually. There's more troops that have moved in. There have been more planes moved over there, so that our regional focus and our regional force levels have gone up since the fall. Now that could be very quickly used to attack Iran if we needed to retaliate if they did something that caused that. But even short of that, it means that they've got more pressures. And of course, what they would like to do is go out and buy more stuff and things. But they've been buying stuff from the Russians. The Russians will provide them with equipment, but they're expected to pay for it because the Russians don't have any money either. And that's more expense being piled on the Iranian regime. And at some point, just like happened with the Soviet Union, they might bust. And the question is, will they? Will this work the way it worked with the Soviet Union? And nobody can say. Just because they're pursuing a strategy that was successful doesn't mean it'll be successful this time. I'll tell you one thing though: if Donald Trump is not reelected in the fall, it's going to fail, because if the Democrats come in, everything's going to relax. Sanctions will come off to some degree. Iranian revenues will go up. If you look at the energy policies the Democrats will pursue here, our own production will decline. Energy prices will go up, which will also help the Iranians. One of the things that there are a couple of things that Trump's been doing that haven't gotten a lot of attention, that are all part of this policy. Part of a trade deal that we just signed with China is that the Chinese agree to either cut back or to a great extent almost stop their oil imports from Iran. And China was one of the big customers. There's still ways to get oil out of Iran, and the Chinese were buying it. The Chinese, a couple of weeks ago, I basically stopped buying Iranian oil. That's more pressure. And this, we're dealing with the Chinese. It's one of the reasons I think Trump's a little loath to put a lot of pressure on China, because they need China to put additional pressure on Iran. So if things go bad with China, the Chinese might start buying more Iranian oil, and that would, of course, undermine the policy. One of the other things I think happened, I can't believe it's coincidental. If you look at what's been going on with Turkey, which is a major Sunni Islamic power in the region. And, in the old days, the Ottomans and the Iranians were always at each other. The Persians were always at each other's throats. And, they have their own pretensions in the region of being a power, being an Islamic power. And you may remember a few months ago where they wanted to move into certain areas of Syria controlled by the Kurds. And Trump basically, you could argue, sold out the Kurds or got them to move back. Why was that? What was that just Trump folding, or was this some sort of a quid pro quo with Turkey? And if you look at what happened right after that, shortly after that, we got the Khalifa, al-Baghdadi, and we killed him in a raid. How did we get him? Where was he? And if you look at a map to see where he was right up in Syria, up near the Turkish border. I would not be surprised if the Turks didn't know where he was, told us where he was, and in return for certain deals with the Turks, we're going to move out of this area. They gave up al-Baghdadi to us, and then we got him. And of course, as the Turks move into Syria, what's happening? Well, that means there's more pressure on Assad, and Assad being bankrolled by Iran. So as the Turks move into Syria, that's additional pressures on Iran. And of course, it's additional possibility that there'll be friction between Iran and Turkey, which is one more thing for the Iranians to worry about. So as I said, if Trump loses, all this is going to end. And then the regime will definitely hold on. If Trump is reelected, does that mean the regime's going to fall? Can't say. Nobody knows how it will turn out. But if, you have to ask the question, what if these pressures on Iran continue for the next 4.5 years? mean, how much longer can they go with, rising taxes, higher prices, higher unemployment? At some point, it may not cause a collapse like happened to the Soviet Union, but they may have to back off. They may have to bring some of their money home to deal with their own problems at home instead of dealing with supporting the Houthis or supporting Hezbollah or supporting Hamas in the Gaza Strip or supporting Syria. I mean, there's only so many dollars to go around, and basically, right now the pressures on Iran are such that they don't have the money to do everything that they want to do. Now they're desperately holding on right now, and they're doing okay, holding all these different fires at bay, while they try to live and survive in the hope, I'm sure, that a Democrat, in this case, looks like it's going to be Joe Biden, will become president in January 2021 and pursue policies that will ultimately help Iran. I mean, there's no other way to look at it. Just as the policies that Barack Obama pursued helped Iran. I mean, Barack Obama used to complain a lot about the horrible things Assad was doing in Syria. Well, what enabled Assad to stay in power? The money coming from Iran. And where did the Iranians get the money to send to Syria? Well, part of it was the money that Barack Obama was sending them. Remember the pallets of cash that went to Tehran? I mean, it probably, it landed there, and there they sent it to Yemen, and they sent it to Lebanon, and they sent it to Syria, and they sent it to Iraq. So on one hand, you had Barack Obama condemning what Assad was doing. And on the other hand, with his other hand, he's bankrolling Assad indirectly via the Iranians. And that's what had been happening. Now, that's not happening anymore. But the question is, if the Democrats get in there, will it happen again? Will they, allow oil prices to go up so that they pursue their energy policies, their Green New Deal or whatever? And the answer is probably yes. So if Donald Trump is not reelected in January, the Iranian regime will survive. If he is reelected in January, they're going to have a tough 4.5 years trying to hold on. And they may ultimately, if they don't fail, they'll definitely have to curtail their activities around the world regionally, which I think from an American point of view would still be a policy success. Okay, let's see what that looks like.